hunt, eh? Yeah, soon enough you'll join him. Who? The dead. Think we build them coffins out of stone for a lark? That's to keep 'em in. Let's move on to the next step in building this nightmare terrain set. It's time to build some very easy scatter terrain and test out some ideas that will serve as the basis for the rest of this nightmare terrain set. This is going to be a quick build, but this is going to be one that will be critical to the future of this project. The inspiration for this set came from some coffins. I was just carving on a bit of foam one day and I ended up carving an interesting looking coffin. This scatter terrain is very much a lesson in crafting on a budget. It ended up being used several different ways and can be used in a number of ways to cut down on your material cost without having to go out and buy any fancy texture rollers or modeling paste or anything like that. So with the coffins carved, I wanted a way to display them. Inspired by the Bloodborne coffins and the way that they are portrayed in the game as just stacked along the street, I wanted to create something of an urban setting, if you will. However, I found myself not wanting to reach for the foam. I've had a few issues in the recent past with my terrain not having enough heft to it. Wanted to try something new. As it happens, I had found a very large jar of plaster of Paris, and started to wonder if I could use that as a replacement for some of the foam texturing, while adding a fair amount of weight to the piece itself. If you ever balled up a piece of aluminum foil and then attempted to spread it out, you may have noticed there's an interesting texture on it. If you take a look at the texture on the inside, you can see it kind of in a way looks like a worked rock texture. And I figured once dried and then broken, it could be pretty easily applied like a set of bricks. But once it was dried and smashed to bits, it was very fun to break. I started laying out and cracking pieces to fit the base itself. These plaster bits of stone are going to be held in place by Sculptamold. Sculptamold is great. It dries firm and it'll act as a kind of fill in between the pieces of plaster. With the addition of the coffee grounds to the texture, this adds a kind of loose stone gravel to the entire thing that creates a weathered and almost eroded stone texture, if you will. The juxtaposition in these materials really creates this idea of like an old stone road that looks like it's been broken up, worked on by geological forces, forcing some of it up, some of it down, overall making it really easy just to build this stuff without having to worry too much. The coffins themselves are basically going to be held in the same way as the plaster stones themselves, and then combined with coffee grounds to cover some of that Sculptamold and kind of blend all of that into the ground. And the Sculptamold combined with the coffee grounds builds the idea of these coffins perhaps like eroding away and the bits of gravel are falling off of them and around them and slowly spreading out over time. Like the rest of the Nightmare terrain set, we're starting with a cheap black or craft acrylic, then hitting this with a blue-gray acrylic mixed with that black to form our base tone. Over this, the stones themselves there's a straight brush of the blue-gray for the stones themselves. And then this gets capped off with a light gray highlight and then a very, very light touch of bone on the outermost edges of the piece itself, where the stone is going to basically connect to another piece. Since the coffins are a different type of work stone, they're going to get their own paint job here. These coffins get the same blue, gray, black mix, but these are then given a brighter gray, followed up by the same light bone dry brush that the stone got, but then given a heavier off-white. And then I decided to come back in a little bit later with a very, very, very light, pure white highlight, just to really capture the edges of those coffins. The wash, though, this is what pulls it to the next level. The two key washes here are the colors that have been constantly used in our Nightmare terrain set. The blue, which could be easily replaced with the purple, and a dark green, which could easily be replaced by a black. So the road stones themselves are going to get the majority of the blue wash and really get it down into some of those cracks. The dark green, though, this went more into the cracks themselves, but most of it ended up going onto the coffee ground texture. The black paint and the highlighting that's already been done has basically painted some of these coffee grounds to an extent. That's part of the reason you want the coffee grounds around where you're putting the coffins. Minimize the amount of time it takes to paint this. And that dark green helps to pull that blue, the blues and the grays from the coffins towards the brown side of the spectrum of color, so you don't have to go in with a straight brown color and then work your way back out. While you could, the point is to make this real easy. Similarly, the stone is being pulled by the blue into a more of a brighter eldritch blue rather than just a blue-gray. I am trying to make these areas look odd and just that off. With it painted, I like what I got. The stone road texture looks surprisingly good, and the plaster of Paris took the color incredibly well. Of course, the eagle-eyed viewer would have noticed that there are a number of exposed. It's time for some spider webs. So with some bits of cotton and a mix of watered down glue, I just started to hide my failures that do not exist anymore. I'd imagine the Walking Dead don't particularly care for spiders building around their final resting places, and it helps to add something interesting to those deep cracks between the road stones. This piece is a proof of concept that I needed to move on to the bigger pieces that will make up the rest of the set. Rest assured, more of these are going to be created, for sure. Not using the black, I think, was the right call for this. While it might help in some regard, it feels more alien. It feels like it fits the theme of the nightmare, and that's what I'm going for. It does strike me now that this could be used as a way to gain elevation in an organic way if you had multiple pieces of different heights. I need to see if I can work on that while creating something like the graveyard from Dark Souls 3. Ooh. Well, if you'll all excuse me, I'm going to go jot down some notes. So remember to like this video And remember to subscribe and turn on those notifications. Leave a comment down below too to help feed the algorithm. Catch you next time.